want to talk this morning with the title, Individualitis and the Dung Gate, which is, I suspect, the first time you'll have heard a talk with that title. And I'd love you to turn to Nehemiah chapter 3, and I suspect it might be the first time you've heard a preach from Nehemiah 3 as well. I want to talk to you about individualitis and the dung gates. I suspect that there's a lot of people in the room who are tainted or who suffer from individualitis. Many human beings are afflicted with the idea that history is mainly about them. That's a human thing. It's something we've had since the garden, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. We believe that history is all about us. That's the main purpose of history, and our view of what the world is revolves around our view of what the world would be if it was all around us. Western people, that's all humans, Western people are even more likely to see the world and history as being about us than most other people. So we're more likely to have the delusion of individualitis than anyone else, because we are Western, and our way of telling the story of the world is, despite postmodernism and despite all the critiques, still very, very Western-centric, very ethnocentric. We tell the story of the world as if it is about us, and as if it is about the triumph of 21st century Western European values. And if you don't believe me, just read a newspaper and see how many implicit judgments are made, even in a given daily paper, which isn't about the world being about you. It's just assumed. No one tells you that because everybody knows it's true. The world is about you if you're a Western person. And young Western students and 20s are even more likely to suffer from it, because as young students and 20s, we haven't yet lived long enough to realize that the world isn't mainly about us. The world's your oyster. It's not. The world is not your oyster. The world is a very, very large ocean, much of which is very dark. There are a whole bunch of oysters in it, one of which is yours, many of which belong to other people. There's a lot of creatures out there that want to eat you, and there's billions of others out there that will never know who you are, and it doesn't matter. Which is really important. The world is not your oyster. The world is a massive ocean of possibilities, yes, dangers, yes, and a lot of people who don't know who you are and won't care. And that's actually quite liberating. I want to explain why that's true. But the chances are that there is a fair bit of individualitis in this room. I say that as a very, very developed and established individualist in my time as well. Here's some ways of telling. You hear that, you think, oh, oyster, ocean, oh, which is it? Here's some ways of telling whether you might suffer from individualitis. Destiny. If you generally think, I have a destiny, you probably suffer from individualitis. If you generally think, we have a destiny, you probably aren't. It's quite a good way of telling. How do you see the plan and purposes for where you fit? Do you see it corporately, as part of a people? Do you see it individually, as part of what you're going to do? Scripture. If you read the Bible and generally default to thinking, this is for me, you might well suffer from individualism. If you think this is for us, you probably don't. If you read, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, and think that's for me, you may have an individualistic bias in your thinking without being aware of it. If you think that's for us, you probably don't. If you see the church as optional and not essential, you probably have individualitis. Right? If you would be, by default, drawn to organic, fluid, open, church, you've probably got an individualism problem. The gospel, if when you summarize the gospel, you never talk about Israel and you never talk about the church, you may well have individualitis. Awful lot of the Bible talks about Israel and the church. Gifts. Some of us, our approach to our gifts is, you come into a new church and you say, or at least you might not say it out loud, but you might think it, I have this gift, how will they use it? People who don't have individualitis tend to say, the church has this need, how can I serve it? It's a very different approach, because your gifts and the need in the church might not match every time. Body parts. You've got a hand that just defines itself as being a hand wherever it goes. And it says, the only role I'm prepared to play around here is a hand. So when I go to a new context, I want to find out what kind of roles and responsibilities might there be for a hand in this context. Whereas actually what we're called to do is to say, what does the body need right now? Because if the body needs some kind of obscure gland that I haven't even heard of, I'll do that in order to fit the need that the people have, rather than look simply for self-actualization. In the grace of God, they often correspond. But they don't always. It's worth thinking that one through. If you think of evangelism, this is a good test. Jesus says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. And this is what you picture. You picture a guy sitting with a rod cast out like this, like a gnome on a toadstool. Just sitting out there, single line fishing. I will make you fishers of men. And what you do is you sit there like this, and then you wheel it in, and then you put your fish away, and then you put it out like that. If that's the picture of fishing you have, you may have individualitis. Or you may just not know very much about fishing in the Mediterranean world in the first century. But if instead you hear, follow me and I will make you fishers of men, and you think, this is about a whole bunch of people, in fact, sometimes even kids and members of the village in general, throwing out a huge net and hauling it all in, and pulling it in dozens and dozens or hundreds and hundreds of fish at once, and then sifting them all out, and everyone's involved, dad, mum, kids, grandparents, then you may well be thinking about evangelism more like Jesus pictured it. And you may not have an individualitis. And finally, if you think about cultural change, like basically great men, and if you read history this way, it is usually men, great men rise up and change history. Wilberforce, Churchill, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Margaret Thatcher. They rise up and change history. And the rest of us sit there and participate and observe and watch. If you have that perspective of cultural change, you've probably got individualitis. It's probably a part of just being Western. You've brought it and you've imbibed it without knowing where it comes from. But if instead you've got the unheard of networks view, that cultural change comes about through complex networks of institutions and individuals of whom you've heard of a small number. But to be honest, cultural change doesn't happen without all of them working in concerted effort to achieve the same thing. If you think that way, you probably don't have individualitis. So, there might be some people here in the room who have what I'm calling individualitis, and you might be at the moment asking, well, what's the problem? Here's a quote from the very insightful thinker Carl Trueman. The belief that we are special is, by and large, complete tosh. Most of us are mediocre, make unique contributions only in the peculiar ways we screw things up, and could easily be replaced as husband, father, or employee by somebody better suited to the task. Yet far too many Christians have senses of destiny that verge on the messianic. The confidence that the Lord has a special plan and purpose just for them shapes the way they act and move. Put bluntly, when I read the Bible, it seems to me that the church is the meaning of human history, but it is the church as a corporate body, not the distinct individuals who make up her membership. My special destiny as a believer is to be part of the church, and it's the church that's the big player in God's wider plan and not me. I think that's quite important and quite insightful. In other words, our destiny is corporate. The scriptures are the story of a corporate people. The church is corporate, and it will outlast all of us. Tom Shaw, Terry Virgo, Richard Dawkins, Rob Bell. The church will outlast all of us. The gospel is corporate. In you and your seed, all the nations will be blessed. Our gifts are corporate. Each one must be done for building up of the others. Evangelism is corporate. Cultural change is corporate. And for all of those reasons, individualitis needs to be punched on the nose quite urgently, and that's what I'm hoping to do this morning. So, Nehemiah chapter 3. This is one of the least individualistic chapters in the Bible you'll find, and it's also one that most of you won't set up camp in your quiet times for many days, and you'll see why as soon as we begin. You all right? I'm not going to be this serious the whole time. We're going to have some fun as well, but there's something quite serious to just raise the issue at the start, and I want you to see it. And then we're going to turn to this very, very obscure passage of Nehemiah, and we'll see how it works. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers the priests, and they built the sheep gates. They consecrated it and set its doors. They consecrated it as far as the Tower of the 100, as far as the Tower of Hananel. And next to him, the men of Jericho built. And next to them, Zaccur, the son of Imri, built. The sons of Hassanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. They're building Jerusalem, building the wall around Jerusalem. And next to them, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, son of Hakkoz, repaired. And next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, son of Meshezabel, repaired. And next to them, Zadok, the son of Baana, repaired. And next to them, the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles wouldn't stoop to serve their Lord. Joiada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, the son of Besodeah, repaired the gate of Yeshanah. They laid its beams and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. And next to them repaired Melatiah the Gibeonite, and Jadon the Meronothite, the men of Gibeon and of Mizpah, the seat of the governor of the province beyond the river. Next to them, Uzziel, the son of Harhaiah, goldsmiths repaired. Next to him, Hananiah, one of the perfumers, repaired, and they restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Next to them, Rephaiah, the son of Hur, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, repaired. Next to them, Jediah, the son of Harumath, repaired opposite his house. And next to him, Hattush, the son of Hashabniah, repaired. Malchiah, the son of Harim, and Hashub, the son of Pahath Moab, repaired another section, and the Tower of the Ovens. Spare a thought for the signers, by the way. Just think about that. Next to him, Shallum, the son of Halohesh, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, repaired, he and his daughters. Hanun and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. They rebuilt it and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars, and repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the Dung gate. Malchiah, the son of Rechab, ruler of the district of Beth Hakerem, repaired the Dung gate. He rebuilt it and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. And Shallum, the son of Kol-Hoseh, ruler of the district of Mizpah, repaired the fountain gate. He rebuilt it and covered it and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. And he built the wall of the pool of Shelah of the king's garden as far as the stairs that go down from the city of David. You're now halfway there. Individualitis is taking a punch on the nose even as we read. I can feel it. After him, Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, that's not the Nehemiah who wrote the book, ruler of half the district of Beth Zur, repaired to a point opposite the tombs of David, as far as the artificial pool and as far as the house of the mighty men. After him, the Levites repaired. Rehum, the son of Bani. Next to him, Hashabiah, ruler of half the district of Keilah, repaired for his district. After him, their brothers repaired. Bavai, the son of Henadad, ruler of half the district of Keilah. Next to him, Ezer, the son of Yeshua, ruler of Mizpah, repaired another section opposite the ascent to the armory at the buttress. After him, Baruch, the son of Zabbai, repaired another section from the buttress to the door of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. We're nearly making a full circle now. After him, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, son of Hakkoz, repaired another section from the door of the house of Eliashib to the end of the house of Eliashib. That sounds like a small section. You built a bit of his house. Maybe it was a little bit slower, I don't know. After him, the priests, the men of the surrounding area, repaired. After them, Benjamin and Hashub repaired opposite their house. After them, Azariah, the son of Masiah, son of Ananiah, repaired beside his own house. After him, Binui, the son of Henadad, repaired another section from the house of Azariah to the buttress and to the corner. Palal, the son of Uzai, repaired opposite the buttress and the tower projecting from the upper house of the king at the court of the guard. After him, Pedaiah, the son of Parosh, and the temple servants living on Ophel repaired to a point opposite the water gate on the east and the projecting tower. The projecting tower is not the thing that's making images appear on the screens, by the way, when we're singing. I just hope that's clear. After him, the Tekoites repaired another section opposite the great projecting tower as far as the wall of Ophel. Above the horse gate, the priests repaired, each one opposite his own house. Last paragraph. After them, Zadok, the son of Immer, repaired opposite his own house. After him, Shemaiah, the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of the east gate, repaired. After him, Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanun, the sixth son of Zalaph, repaired another section. After him, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, repaired opposite his chamber. After him, Malchiah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired as far as the house of the temple servants and of the merchants, opposite the muster gate and to the upper chamber of the corner. And between the upper chamber of the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants repaired. Now, some of you will remember nothing from this talk except that a long passage with a list of names was read in it, and if that's all that happens, I think that's okay. And we're going to see why as we go. It's 445 BC. The exile of Judah, which is the low point in the nation's history, is over, and the people of Israel, under the leadership of Nehemiah, have gone back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. But this sort of chapter drives some of you absolutely crazy. How enormously pedantic and unthinking of those of us who will have to study in our devotional times because we decided to read through the Bible in a year. How very thoughtless of that person to write it all down in such tedious, pedantic detail. What do we do with it? I've only heard this chapter preached on by somebody else once. It was by a loud pastor from Seattle that one or two of you might have heard of. And he used it as an example of Nehemiah's outstanding leadership, which with respect is virtually the opposite of what the chapter is about. Nehemiah isn't even mentioned in this chapter. It's pretty much the worst place in Scripture to get the great leader from. All it is a list of names of dozens and dozens of people who were involved in a project. The jewelers and the tradesmen and the officials and the religious leaders and the perfume makers who each built little bits of a wall to make sure that God's city was safe. That's all that's happened. It's just a list of names and a little bit of the wall that they got. I trust you got that as we were reading through it. Just lots and lots of names of obscure, forgotten Jewish men who built a little bit of, in fact some women as well, built a little bit of a wall at a time, the whole way round, so it formed a full circle and made sure that Jerusalem was safe. Why on earth did Ezra bother writing it down? Why does anybody care? Because otherwise, you and I might conclude that it was Nehemiah what did it. we might conclude that Nehemiah's great leadership caused a wall to be built on its own. And that really, because history is about the great man who does things, the minions who actually put the bricks in place aren't really the ones that matter. There's a few Nehemiahs and a few Ezras, a few great men. The rest of us live lives of quiet desperation, and we observe, and we may or may not be involved in putting a brick on top of a brick, but we're not the ones that matter. The one that matters is the big guy who you've heard of. If you operate with that framework, an awful lot of the Christian life and an awful lot of the Hebrew life is rendered meaningless by your misunderstanding of the way God works in the world. And that is not the way that Ezra the scribe wanted us to see what actually happened that day. And you'll see this is not the only place where a list like this exists. You'll find it multiple times as you read through Ezra and Nehemiah. They're tough when you get them in devotional times. But if nothing else, I hope to equip you today to read lists like that, to be giving Individualitis a punch on the nose every time you did. This is not about Nehemiah the great man. This is about dozens and dozens of people you've never heard of doing a little bit, and God seeing his work done through a community and not just through an individual. It was Palal repairing the buttress, and Shallum's daughters working next to the Tower of the Ovens. And it was Malchiah repairing the dung gate. I love it! You got the dung gate! You're that guy. Everybody's going, Tower of the Ovens, freshly baked bread. You know, I tell you what, Sam led into the meeting, didn't he? It was just like, it's wonderful, freshly baked bread. He did not say, freshly baked dung from God. And there's a good reason, because none of us want to be working near the dung gate. And Micaiah gets given that job, and off he goes. He goes, all right, this wall needs to be built. I will work on the dung gate. And that will be, I will get written down in the Bible. And you can imagine for centuries after people going, you're the guy who got written down. That's the only thing we know about you. I don't know how tall you are. I don't know how many children you had. I don't know what kind of a person you were. I don't know your wife's name. I don't know if you had pets. All I know about you is you built a dung gate. And that's the story of Malchiah that's lasted now for 2,500 years. That's all we know. He built a dung gate. But without everybody doing their job, without him doing his job, building his dung gate, and everybody else building the Tower of the Ovens and the projection tower and the Tower of the Hundreds and all the rest of it, and even the guy who did the little bit opposite his house, so I was like, oh, I was a bit tired. So I just thought, I'll just go and build a bit outside my house and then go back. Even then, without everybody doing it, the wall and the leader and the nation are all but useless. Here's why. What use is part of a wall? You ever thought about that? What use is, you're building a city wall, what use is to have part of a wall? We built some of the wall. That was what we did. And Nehemiah sits the people down to celebrate and say, guys, we've had a great day, we've had a great project, we have now built part of a wall. And the people say, that's not good enough. Doesn't protect us from our enemies. We need absolutely all of it. Ask the Belgians. Right? You heard of the Maginot Line? Yeah? The Maginot Line was the classic, it's the ultimate testimony in history to the futility of building part of a wall. Right? This is what happened. Second World War, the Germans, late 1930s, the Germans are beginning to look a little bit threatening. Guy with a Charlie Chaplin mustache, who some of you have heard of, looks like he's might be threatening somebody else. And so the Allies decide, do you know what we'll do? We will build part of a wall. And we will build it from the south of the Ardennes forest to the Alps. And somebody said, you sure we should only be building part of a wall? And they said, no, can't go through the Ardennes. There's trees in the Ardennes. Human beings and trees cannot coexist. As soon as the Germans walk into the trees, they will disappear into thin air. And somebody said, are you sure? I think human beings and trees can coexist. And the Germans eventually said, do you know what, we can actually. And what we'll do is we'll knock down the trees, we'll drive through the trees, and we'll capture Paris in a few days. Building part of a wall doesn't do anything. And the reason why it matters that everybody's doing their bit in this story, and the reason why the pedantic levels of detail is because if you have a city wall that's all but complete, and a dung gate that's this wide, but the dung gate this wide is left unrepaired so people can clamber over the bricks and come in, the city falls, and God's purposes to redeem the world through Abraham's seed are dead. There's no Jesus, there's no gospel. Malchiah, in his way, is defending the right for you to have a gospel by building a dung gate. That might sound a little bit more impressive than when you first read it, I don't know. But the chapter tells us, this chapter, and the Bible, again, there's a lot of chapters like this in the Bible, if you've read it. There are lots of chapters like this, that if you want to see God's promises come about, it takes all of us doing our little bit, street sweeping, parenting, managing, administrating, teaching, dung gate building, to the glory of God. That's the people of God, that's what we do. We do our bit. We do our bit of the wall. And it's not going to, this message will not be broadcast wide online and thousands of people downloading it. It's not that kind of a thing. It doesn't inspire, in a sense, the same level of, I can go and do this on my own, because in some ways my whole point is, no, you can't, and you mustn't think like that. Our entire purpose is to say, where is my bit of wall, and how do I do that for the glory of God? That's what Malchiah did, and that's what all of you are called to do, whatever expression that takes. Individualists, and most British people, ask, what am I doing to impact the world? And if you're Christians, it's what am I doing to impact the world for God? These people asked, what are we doing to impact the world for God? And the difference is as wide as the world. Your question, what are we doing to impact the world for God? When I was preparing this, I just couldn't get away from Malchiah. Probably because of the word dung. I thought it was amusing that that's what he was going to be doing. Until today, you'd never heard of him, I imagine. He wasn't on the Mobilized video. You'd never done a character study on him. But in his very basic, mundane way, he established God's kingdom by fixing a dung gate. And I think Malchiah and his dung gate have a couple of things to teach us. The first one is that the role of brilliant leaders and geniuses taking on the world and changing it for the better is much smaller than we generally think. And if you go and ask many of them, they will tell you the same story. So the first thing that Malchiah and his dung gate have to teach us is the role of the great leader genius, as much as obviously much of the Bible is about those people. It's about God anointing leaders, and that's good, we love that. But the role of the great man and the great genius is much smaller than we generally think as British individualists. The second thing Malchiah and his dung gate teach us is that the role of ordinary people who never appear on the video and never get written about, but build their dung gates and work in their offices and raise their children, is much greater than we generally think. And that's very encouraging, because the vast majority of us in this room are going to be the latter and not the former. There might be a few people who are widely known coming out of this room. Actually, I pray there will be. I think that'd be good for society if there are Christians who are known. But the vast majority of us are not going to be known. The vast majority of us will labor largely in obscurity, known to people who know us well, and valued and treasured by those people for who we are to them and what we do with our normal lives. And the messianic sense of self-belief that characterizes many of us will turn out in the end to be somewhat unfounded. What we need to do is to say, well, there's only one Messiah, and he's chosen to work through a corporate people numbering 1 billion or more, and we've all got little bits of this wall of God's kingdom to build. You see, my story is that I was one of the most rampantly individualitis people there was. I suppose Tom and Joel and a few others here have known me since I was 18 or 19, and they would probably be able to tell you the story. And that's why my wife writes notes, by the way, in the top right-hand corner. Joel wasn't kidding, just in case you were wondering. Speak humbly, I've got it here. Speak humbly or I will hunt you down and kick your ass. That's what she said. Now, there's an individualitis that has run deep in me for many years. And so this is how it kind of gets festered in the world I live in. So I used to, 14, 15, there was a period of time when Delirious, I think they were cutting edge back then, used to run these big gigs down on the greens in Littlehampton. And some of, Christian youth groups would go and flock and be there. And one of the songs that they used to sing a lot of, which we all used to love, was the song History Maker. I'm going to be a history maker in this land. I'm going to be a speaker of truth. There's a lot in that song that inspires you to faithfulness, and I love that. And I love the song. But here's what it fed in me. It was like, I am going to be one of those people who make history. People before me, they haven't made history. Nobody's writing about them. I'm going to be one of those people. I'm going to be one of the ones whose achievements for God, but that's always in brackets, really, in the flow of the sentence, whose achievements get recorded and trumpeted as examples of godly leadership. I'm going to be one of the history makers. And of course, there's thousands of us all singing the same thing, and probably many of us are thinking exactly the same way. So we're going to be history makers. We're going to do it. We're going to be the ones who break into the record books. It's like Guinness Book of Records, but for Christians. Yeah, we're going to do it, yeah? Yeah. And then, see, that's your Christian packaging. And it only takes one, I know they didn't write it with that goal, but it only takes one song like that to just leave that in your heart. For years, it was for me. I'm going to be. I didn't usually sing it like that. I don't know why I did just then, actually, but I'm going to be. But it was, I just had it quite deep in me. I am going to be one of those people. But simultaneously, there's the secular world is doing the same. the secular world, the sort of masters of the universe culture, which I went to boarding school and then went to Cambridge. So there's quite a lot of masters of the universe culture in an English boarding school and Cambridge together, as those of you who've been to either will know. And so you get, the dreaded word there, or the word everybody aspires to is potential. You have potential. And what they do is they talk to you like you are going to be unusual, and that everybody else who gets up in the morning and builds their dung gate is somehow an inferior class of human. And what you will do is be one of the ones who goes and sits in the cabinet or leads a business. And that somehow has this dramatic import on the way the world is, over and above the people who sweep the streets. It's massively arrogant and contemptuous, and it's fueled in that kind of culture by a lot of people. Often, again, there's a good motive in it. Somebody has got to lead the country, and somebody's got to create jobs and all that stuff. It's not bad, but the point is they sort of say, you are not like those people, you will be one of these people. And it leads you to believe that there's a few people who matter and many people who don't really, and that the goal of life is to be one of the people who matter. And I bought it. I bought it from the Christian side, I bought it from the secular side. So then when I first started going along to young leaders weekends, I mean, a story I've told a number of times before, but I just think it's so funny. When I first met people who are now among my best friends, Phil and Ruth Moore, if I first met them, Phil is a leader in Wimbledon, a leader of a church in Wimbledon. Nice guys. And so they meet me, we're chatting in a bar, and at the end of the conversation, I subsequently found out when Rachel and I left and walked back to where we were going, that Ruth turned to Phil and said, gosh, he's arrogant. That was the first impression I would have made at a young leaders weekend, when you imagine arrogance is not one of the virtues we're trying to cultivate. But I just bought it. I bought Individualitis, and to a degree I think my wife had as well, although in a much more humble way. We together are going to be the ones who write the books, we're going to be up and coming, we're going to be big things, and we're going to go and achieve things for God, and we're going to sort out the theology of the world, and we're going to sort out human rights and sex trafficking together. She's going to do that, I'm going to do this, rah. You may have noticed that the theology of the church and sex trafficking both kind of haven't quite been sorted out as we might have expected. And so we've got this, but we've got this in our bones to a degree. And again, I'm much worse than her. I don't want to tar her with the same brush. But there's a bit of that history maker thing in both of us, the individualitis. We've got potential, we're up and coming, books begin to come out, have you heard of this? And conferences and even international travel. You got on a plane and flew over some water, you must be a big thing, and off you go. And everybody's beginning to go. And then our lives hit the wall about 2 years ago. A lot of this was happening already, God was working in me, but about 2 years ago we got the definitive revelation that we were not going to be those people who solve the world's problems on our own. Both of our children are quite severely autistic, and it's been a very painful journey for both of us, and some of the things that you imagine for your life change dramatically. So our days begin very early in the morning, and it affects the fact that they wake up very early, and then they will have extremely repetitive behavior. They won't go to normal school. They almost certainly won't live independently unless God miraculously heals them. They spend a lot of their time repeating things and flapping and going, and running up and down and doing laps and wanting to watch the same things on television all over and over again, and they don't interact normally. They don't play with other children. They don't ask questions. Zeke said yes for the first time about 6 weeks ago. He's now 4.5. And they live different lives, and they have made our lives dramatically different. And one of the things that's happened is that things like waking up that early in the morning and being emotionally on the edge for most of the day, particularly for my wife, means that the public events that I do, I'm doing like 3 of these this entire year. I used to be traveling all the time. I was going, hi, yeah, great, yeah, good to see you. I'm off down the road to somewhere else. That's not happening now. It's happening very, very occasionally, because Tom and I are really good friends, and Joel and I are really good friends. But other than that, I'm doing very, very little. And that's if you think you're going to save the world by doing something like that, then that's a check on your progress as such. And then the way that the children behave, in the sense that they just have the most apocalyptic meltdowns that you'd ever seen, but they're not having tantrums like they understand and you can reason them out of them. They just cannot understand at all what's going on day to day. They are really upset and really angry, and they have no idea why. They can't tell you why. That means you can't really travel, and you can't go on holiday where you would have wanted to go, and you can't put them in the schools you wanted them to go to. And your prospects for future ministry are dramatically affected. You think, I thought I might go here, here, and here, but now, actually, I need to pull back absolutely everything I'm doing, apart from maybe 3 things a year, and everything else I'm going to do is in this town of 100,000 people, which I love being in, by the way, but it just changes the way you see what you're going to do. It means that you're emotionally fragile an awful lot of the time. It means that you are crying a lot more than anybody else you know. And you are living with an emotional tenseness and sometimes difficulty in marriage as a result of the emotional tenseness all the time. You're tired all the time. Your capacity to do things for God is limited. And I'm not saying any of this to get you to side with me and go, oh, isn't it wonderful? What a lovely man. What I'm saying is, life hits a wall sometimes. I don't want it to hit you. I pray it doesn't happen to any of you. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I love my kids, but they are hard. But what I am saying is, if you think that you, as an individual, are going to be able to rescue some of the world's problems, you will find that until something like that happens to you, it is sort of imaginable that you could do it. When something like that happens, as it will for some, and it'll take different shapes for all of you, it is utterly unimaginable that you can change the world by yourself, or even get close. You suddenly realize, I am not the big player here. And in fact, I'm desperately dependent on other people doing their bits of the wall. My bit of the dung gate just got dramatically smaller. I'm not even the guy who fixes the dung gate. I'm the guy who puts that brick in that little bit and puts a bit of paste on it in the dung gate. My capacity has been destroyed, or not destroyed, but dramatically downsized as a result of what's going on. And many of us in the future, and many of us now even, will have things in our lives like that prevent us and curtail us. We could have imagined, writing, traveling, speaking, working for human rights organization, we can make the world better as a couple. And now we say, no, Jesus, thank you. You're making the world better through a people of whom we are a very, very small part. And I praise God for that. Because if we weren't, what hope would the world really have? It used to be imaginable that we could maybe make the impact ourselves. But now, and I give thanks to God for this, it is totally clear that we can't do anything without the church. We can't do anything at all without the church. We can't really get up and get anything done in a day without the church, let alone save the world. It doesn't work that way. Nothing I can do without the church. I am completely dependent on a community of other people who have the same goals and same heart for Jesus as I do. Some of them drive me crazy, and they drive you crazy as well. But as you stand together and work together, you get huge things done. You see massive inroads into enemy territory that if it was down to you, you'd get nowhere. And it might take, as it did for me, something like autism to wake you up to that reality. And for others of you, it won't. And you know it already. Praise God for that. Don't make the same mistakes I did. But for us, the church, you see, there's hundreds of people in the church, of whom every single person has got a little bit of brick to put in their dung gate. This is just from our point of view. We can't get by without them. We've got a 40-year-old woman with 6 kids, 4 of whom have special needs, who's fighting cancer, called Ruth. And she sometimes encourages us and even makes us food sometimes with all that she's facing. There's a 22-year-old guy called Matt, who's a bit of an apprentice of mine in a way, who is taking on more preaching in the church because I can't do as much as I was going to have to before. And the church needs to keep growing without me having to run around everywhere doing all the ministry. So he's coming through and just taking a bit of that from me. There's a 65-year-old woman with arthritis who barely leaves her chair called Janet. She prays for us. That's what she does. That's her ministry in life, in a way. She sits in her chair and she prays for the leaders of the church and a few other things. And she prays and she tells us that she's praying for our kids and for our well-being and our ministry and effectiveness. There's a single woman of about 40 called Jenny who helps look after our kids so Rachel can get into the meetings more often so that she can be spiritually fed by what's going on because she's very rarely able to come with me. And there's hundreds of other Malchiah-like people who are just building bits of Dungate whose work in the gospel makes it possible for any of us to be fruitful. Many of you are going to be people like that. And my heart for today is that instead of thinking about that as somehow falling short of something you wanted, that you see Malchiah-like Dungate building as the highest thing to which anyone can be called, not because the work in itself is the best job anybody can get, but because what the church as a whole is called to is the best job anybody can get, and you get to play a part of it. The church is the big player in God's wider plan and not me. That's what I want you to understand. I'm not trying to short-circuit 10 years of growth and maturity either. I know that some of you will find it difficult to hear this and you won't really you'll struggle with some of the things I'm saying. And is he saying that? No, you can't surely mean this. I know that. And some of it is just born out of our own experience. But I felt it was important to come and talk about that because life does things like that to us. It's more dramatic in some cases than others. Many people have got much more dramatic stories than I have. It won't, as I say, it won't happen to all of you. I pray it doesn't happen to any of you. But if we operate as if the world is changed by a few great people, and we're going to be those people, we face terrible disillusionment or overweening pride. One of the two, right? If you think, going to change the world, if it happens, oh no. And if it doesn't happen, oh no. Do you see? If it happens, oh no, because you'll be extremely arrogant. Now, if it doesn't happen, oh no, because you'll be extremely disillusioned. And that's why Malchiah and his Dungate are so encouraging for me. I'm so glad. There's a book on Nehemiah. We love gifted and anointed leadership. But I love within that book about gifted and anointed leadership, there are the names of literally hundreds of people who otherwise we would have no idea had ever lived, who are just working hard, doing what God told them to do, and together, corporately, they see the kingdom come. They see Jerusalem saved and preserved. They see Israel kept safe so that the Messiah could come who's going to bless all the nations. We do it. We do it. They did it together. We do it together. We do it by releasing others and by encouraging and serving them and training them. That's why Paul, you ever notice again the last chapters of Paul's letters? Read Romans 16 recently? How much time do you spend on Romans 3? Wow, I could just... Romans 3, 21 to 31, you read through Romans. You can spend months in your devotional times on 10 verses. We get to Romans 16 and we've gone through it in 2 minutes. It's just a list of names. But the reason why Paul does that, and the reason why so many people do it, is they want you to know. They want the church to know. They want the church universal to know. I could not do this without these people. We have been fruitful. I have had the privilege of being the mouthpiece that's seen the gospel go here. That was my role. She built a dung gate. That was her role. Together, we did it. We did it. And that's why Paul thanks people. Pray. Please make sure you let her know she's been a great encouragement to be in the Lord. Tell these two, agree together in the Lord, because they've been very useful to me in my ministry. Make sure you bring this guy. He's really valuable to me. You don't know who he is. Doesn't matter. God sees what he's doing. And it's only through them together that the gospel advances. That's why individualitis is so dangerous. Because it strips us of the dignity of the ordinary and makes us think that the superstars are the ones who do it. I love superstars. I'm grateful for them. But they're not the whole story. So I used to despise the ordinary. I did. I think if somebody said, you are going to be an ordinary person, that would have been the biggest insult you could have given me. I said, I would rather you said I had 3 heads and I smelt very bad. I just don't want to be ordinary. Does that sound a little bit like Avril Lavigne? It wasn't intended to. But I'm just, I don't like the idea of being ordinary. I used to hate it. But that's what teenagers say, isn't it? That's what Avril said. That's what I would feel. It's just like, no, I don't want to be ordinary. I don't want to be just another person building my brick. And some of you, there's a heart struggle in you right now. This is if I can put it this way, I wasn't here for last night, but I think this is the difficult bit of what Mike was talking to us about yesterday. This is the bit that people don't like about that stuff. But in some ways, I wanted to talk about it. I've never done this before, but I wanted to challenge you so that you realize, is there something in my heart that has actually put my destiny above the destiny of God's people? And if you have, tear it down. Don't wait until the autism for your situation, whatever that may be, forces it out of you. George Bernard Shaw said, I'm told, we look at the world and we say that the reasonable man adapts himself to suit the environment, and the unreasonable man adapts his environment to suit himself. And we can therefore conclude that all progress is made by unreasonable men. It was a George Bernard Shaw quote. I loved it. If there had been Twitter back when I first heard it, I would have sent it out over 2 or 3 tweets. I would have gone, that's amazing. I want to be an unreasonable man. I'm going to be. I mean, basically, George Bernard Shaw was singing History Maker before it was written, and I want to be one of those guys. Unreasonable, yeah. I'll get up people's noses. I'll cause some trouble. I'll ruffle some feathers and rah. But don't worry, the world will change, and I will be one of the good guys. There are movers and shakers, and there are sitters and watchers, and I want to be a mover and a shaker. I want to be an unreasonable man. Geniuses are interesting. Everybody else is boring. That is a classic, immature perspective, and it was knitted into my soul, and I've since been mugged by life, and I give glory to God for that. I've had it taken out of me by a series of events, and I guess just growth in Scripture and good friends, and it's not all about autism for me at all. That's just the most recent thing. Many other things have happened in that effect as well, and my individualitis has been largely undone. I give thanks to God for that. I've seen that my role and Rachel's role don't matter that much in themselves. God doesn't need my gifts. Jesus, Jesus turns around and says, out of these very stones, no, John the Baptist says, out of these very stones, God can raise up children for Abraham. He's not talking about gifts, but might as well have been saying, do you really think God needs you? Andrew, you really think he needs you, your words, your brain? You think God can raise up children for Abraham from the stones? He could turn that speaker into a preacher better than you. What are you talking about? Sit down, shut up, stop getting self-important ideas. He doesn't need me. I get the privilege of working with him by the grace of God to see people come to know Christ. But that's not, he doesn't need me. He's not sort of going, oh goodness, where will I be without Andrew and Rachel? You know, but some of us think like that, don't we? So, I mean, I think some of you, there's nervous laughter and there's comic laughter. And I think there's been a bit of both at times this morning. Because some of us know that is how I am inclined to think about my indispensability. But I've seen that God's purposes advance through 2s and 5s, 10s, 50s, hundreds, thousands, millions, even billions of little people, each doing what God has called them to. Building the Tower of the Ovens. Running a business. Raising an autistic child, teaching a class of 8-year-olds, sweeping a street, fixing a dung gate. What use is part of a wall? Truman again. Put bluntly, when I read the Bible, it seems to me that the church is the meaning of human history. But it's the church as a corporate body, not the distinct individuals who make up her membership. My special destiny as a believer is to be part of the church. And it's the church that's the big player in God's wider plan, and not me.